Coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
Hi, how are you? My name is Mariana Gomez de la Villa. I'm the director for distributed ledger technologies at ING globally. And I'm really happy to be at REIMAGINE 2020. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Hey everybody, it's Patrick McLain, one of your hosts for Reimagine 2020. Thank you guys for joining so far. We've had a lot of really interesting conversations. And this one is very interesting, I think, from my perspective, the one coming up. I'm going to introduce you to Mariana. I will let her give you a bit about her background. She works for ING. And why I'm really interested in this conversation is because, I think there's a lot of misconceptions maybe sometimes between how banks are interacting with blockchain technology or distributed ledger technologies, right? And then kind of maybe on the other end, some of like the maximalists of Bitcoin, etc. So again, I'm really excited for this interview. But before I destroy the introduction, Mariana, introduce yourself and tell everybody maybe a little bit about how you got into blockchain.
Hi everybody. My name is Mariana Gomez de la Villa. I'm working for ING indeed, and I'm the program director for distributed ledger technologies. And actually what I do is trying to solve specific problems that certain business lines would have within ING with this technology. But we use it as an enabler, so we don't use it actually as the objective of it. And in certain cases, we really have to say, the technology might not be suitable for solving that specific problem. And whether banks actually are good sometimes or are frowned upon because of joining these type of blockchain ecosystems. I mean, we're well aware that that one of the major reasons why obviously this technology started to rise was because they wanted to circumvent financial institutions. But at the end, I think it's a free ecosystem, and financial institutions have brought a lot of investment as well, and they have brought a lot of use cases to this specific landscape. So I think it's a nice opportunity for us, and that's the way we saw it in the beginning, and that's why we decided to start investing on this technology.
Awesome. So hey, I want to definitely understand maybe a bit of like ING's perspective. It seems you guys are very motivated, and I'd like to hear a bit about that. But before we get there, do you mind telling the audience, just a bit about your background? What kind of brought you to this place that you're really, was it jobs you've had in the past? Was it experiences you had in the past? Why are you specifically motivated in blockchain, and what about it interests you?
Well, I had no clue about blockchain. Obviously, I heard about Bitcoin, like probably the same as everybody else, right? Back in 2008. But I didn't really, had the vision, and I didn't think, like I'm going to join. I was actually working on payments in that time. I was working on a PSP. And then ING actually, poked me in. So then I started working for ING. And when they started researching the technology and what it could imply for the bank, then it caught my attention. I started seeing, what kind of use cases could be actually leverage these technologies for in the payments escape. So I was in the initial parts of the exploration, the payments lead for blockchain. And then when I started digging more into it, and I started getting to know the team, and I started getting to know everybody and a little bit more about the technology, then it started to, having a bigger effect in me. Then I started obviously, having a greater vision, let's say, of what it could actually imply for the bank. And then that's how the whole program started actually, happening within ING. So then we, from payments, we start going as well into other type of use cases, such as, for example, bank treasury, financial markets, lending, etc. So it was by mere, I would say, coincidence, kind of, in the beginning, and then out of curiosity, what sparked actually those thoughts in my mind.
Got it. Well, we're glad that you found interest in it, and that you're. It sounds like you're here to help the space. So, um, when we talk about kind of how ING looks at it, right? I mean, obviously you guys have done analysis, and it sounds like you guys have identified multiple aspects of the business that you believe either blockchain or distributed ledger technology can kind of apply. How is ING thinking about it, and what would you say are there? I'm sure there's a plethora of use cases, but what are the one, two, three that like really get you guys excited?
Okay, for us, actually, it was in the beginning a matter of efficiencies, right? You can imagine that being a huge bank, a global bank, and then we have different business lines like retail, wholesale, etc. In different countries, you have different type of customer journeys. And those customer journeys as well have differences among themselves. So what we wanted to create was actually the digitization of some of those specific asset classes to gain efficiencies and to reduce, obviously, costs, right? So those were the major levers that we had. So cost efficiencies, again, the revenues, for example, having new revenue streams out of it, etc. And then as the time went through, we start seeing other opportunities. For example, right now, the digitization or tokenization of specific asset classes, maybe to open different type of markets, secondary markets, maybe to reduce the barriers, for example, for new investors, etc. So I think that the more you start gaining that expertise and understanding what the technology can actually do for you, the better you can position the technology as well to help you on again, solving or gaining those efficiencies within the bank processes. So we saw it as an opportunity. We are still seeing it as an opportunity, and that's the way we are actually currently implementing it within the core of the bank, right? So we have been, for the past years, not only doing, obviously, proof of concepts, pilots, checking if those things actually work on the technical side with regards to the feasibility of the use case, but also, for example, with regards to, if it's legally possible, until which parts is that legally possible. For example, what kind of jurisdictions are you going to touch? How are you going to model that asset class? Is it regulated properly, et cetera, et cetera. So it has way more aspects than actually the technology itself, and that's pretty much what has taken us, all these years to learn.
Got it. And I want to touch on regulation here in a minute, because I think that's a really interesting aspect. I think a lot of the crypto space has experienced regulation. I think it's one of the more, I've been in technology most of my life. This is one of the more interesting technologies, and the fact that it can't just be a technology, right? It's like a technology plus like a whole list of things that get tagged along with it, like governments and legal frameworks. So I think in that context, it's very unique. And obviously, being a bank, this is something that you guys have to take in consideration in anything that you do. But before we move to that, when we talk about implementation from ING's perspective, can you walk me through a little bit about what has your past experience been with implementation? Maybe just a few lessons you learned, and then how are you guys kind of thinking about implementation going forward?
Yeah, I'll be really happy to do that. So with regards to the implementation, it has been a huge journey, right? The technology, again, as I mentioned, is not actually something difficult, right? Once you start getting a hold on it, you can realize that, for example, you can develop a proof of concept or something that actually works in a few sprints. So the biggest challenge actually has been the concept education that you have to give to all of your colleagues, colleagues in terms of maintenance, for example, the ownership of that specific asset class, right? The custodianship of that, how is it going to operate, or the processes that are, around it that need to be set up, because you're talking about, obviously, again, infrastructure that needs to be enterprise-grade infrastructure, right? So it has a totally different type of requirements than the ones that you would have, for example, with a normal startup or with a smaller value proposition, because whatever you do, it goes a huge scale, right? You need to be seriously careful, and you need to be considering all the type of risks that might actually, that you might be touching upon. So that has been actually quite a learning curve, because sometimes you think that you have it all, right? And then, in discussions, then you start discovering, oh, have you done that? Or have you done also that? Or have you looked at that? Or how are you gonna manage this? And then, you know, it's like a never-ending list of actually things that you need to think before actually you can properly go to production or launch any specific value proposition based on blockchain. So it has been really enlightening and really arduous work from the team and from the support functions that actually help us to bring this forward. But it has been quite cool, because then at the same time you realize some of the problems that the technology might still have, right, that are not solved. And then, for example, that gives you opportunities to solve them yourself. And that has been the case. For example, we were working on a payments use case, as I mentioned in the beginning. And then, for example, we realized that privacy was something that was not actually, at that time, in 2017, for example, being solved yet, right? So then we start working, for example, on zero knowledge proofs, which is really, at that time, it was really nascent type of cryptographic primitives. And we started actually using those cryptographic primitives for this specific payments use case, and then seeing, you know, how could we factor that code in order to be able to actually move forward with our case. Now, for example, last year we also launched, we actually were working on a zero knowledge node for one of the technologies that we also use, which is Corda. So again, you know, the usage of this technology gives you, again, a different view on some of the problems, and then that gives you also the opportunity to solve those problems, right? And then you can, build up more knowledge, capabilities, intellectual property, you can monetize them on a later stage, and you can actually create, again, those solutions or efficiencies that you were looking for.
I feel like we could have this conversation forever. There's a lot I want to talk about. Before I forget it, a little off like the next few points, but as you talk about, you know, zero knowledge proofs, how are banks thinking about zero knowledge proofs and, you know, things like bullet proofs? Do you kind of see that going mainstream? Is it there yet? Just curious to quickly hear your thoughts there.
I think there are still specific problems with the scalability of zero knowledge proofs in a lot of cases, but you do see a lot of people actually picking up the standardization of these cryptographic primitives. You also see, for example, not only people picking them up and starting to learn more about how to handle them and how to manage them or implement them, but you also see collaboration, right? And there has been a huge amount of contributions, let's say, to this type of primitives and the way you can actually use them and the way you can improve them from the larger ecosystem. So it's really interesting to see who is using what, for which purposes, what kind of use case are they actually starting to look into. And you could also see in the beginning it was, I think, more towards Ethereum, right? And now you can see it permeating to other type of platforms as well. And but those are not the only ones, right? Those have been actually quite in the hype, let's say, for the last years, I think since 2014 more or less. But you also see there are other cryptographic primitives that you can also use actually, and you see the cryptographic community being also quite interested, right, on collaborating and making sure that blockchains or distributed ledgers can be more useful than they actually currently are.
Got it. So real quick, to kind of wrap up this section, and just two quick questions, like maybe like a little bit rapid fire, but of all of the pilots or implementations of blockchain or DLT that you've been a part of or have you seen at ING, what's the one like past, present, or maybe in the future that excites you the most? Like which pilot do you think is one of the best use cases?
I have mixed feelings, to be honest. Like, we had one specific initiative called, now it's called Congo. It's the first spin out that we actually had as ING. And it came from an idea of one of our colleagues in the trade finance space, in commodity trading. And yeah, it has been kind of like the baby, right? We learned how to work with that specific initiative. It was one of the first pilots that we did in production. It has been one of the first consortiums that we actually set up as ING. As I mentioned, is one of the first spin-outs that we had. So it has learned a lot. So it's really close to my heart and it's really dear. On the other side, for example, like getting more geeky, right? The zero knowledge proofs, we had a saga. We released a 3 different type of solutions actually on zero knowledge proofs open source, and the last one that we had is not open source precisely, but that specific learning curve, you know, on the monetization, on the adoption, on the network effects that you actually need, on seeing the evolution of zero knowledge proofs actually has been something that has excited me a lot, and I have learned seriously a huge amount of different aspects, not only on the cryptography of it, but also, for example, as I mentioned, on the monetization, on the intellectual property, on so many aspects of it that you will think, you know, even though it's only technology, it is not, right? It's way deeper than that, and you again have to see a broader type of perspective or panoramic when you are using something like this. So I think those two would be my favorites for different reasons.
Got it. All right. Last rapid fire question. If you could go back in time into any, like your experience kind of coming into blockchain, like what lesson would you say that you guys learned? If you could go back and give yourself any lesson, or as a team, what would be one thing you would pull out? Like what's one key part that you guys learned along this journey?
I think validate your assumptions, you know. I believe, for example, in the zero knowledge proofs part, we at a certain point got carried out with, you know, we think this is a great idea and we think that this is the way we should go. But if you don't validate certain assumptions, you might hit a really hard wall later on, right? So going back to service design and going back to design thinking actually, and those principles of, you know, always validate your assumptions, that will be one of the major learnings, that even though it has been embedded at ING and we have our own methodology that uses these principles, and, you know, you hear it almost every single day, it's quite easily forgotten, you know, in the passion and in the when you are really working and when you are in a team, you know, and you have this fervency, then sometimes you forget those basic principles. So you really have to always go back and validate and validate and validate everything that you're assuming.
I appreciate that. You know, I think one thing I'm always interested in, we were talking a little earlier, you know, we do a decent amount on the corporate innovation side. So I think that there's certain lessons, and I feel like enterprise or institutional organizations have like kind of figured out blockchain. You know, for some companies, they're kind of dipping their toes in the water. For pilots, it can be a horrible experience. It can be a great experience. And you know, this conversation, and I think other ones we're having throughout the week, really want to kind of pull that out, right? So whether it is the person from the enterprise side who's watching this right now, or, you know, a student or a company with a startup that's kind of thinking about, you know, how to approach these problems, I think it really takes all sides to be able to prove this stuff at scale. So pulling out from ING a bit, so I think I want to zoom out for a second and kind of look at this from a global, you know, conversation. I think one of the things with blockchain, as you mentioned earlier, is it's kind of been bolted onto the technology has been a lot of regulation, right? So this could come from the form of, you know, investment vehicles to, you know, banks having concerns, or central banks having concerns about, you know, how this is going to impact their future. Do they want to be leaders in it? Do they want to be followers? Some governments may be welcoming this adoption, and others not providing as much clarity, right? Which I can see as kind of stifling innovation, where people, even if they have good ideas, are not attempting them. Not that they're confused about what they're doing now, but that there's just no clarity about how that might impact their future. So, you know, obviously as ING, working with governments is something you have to do on a regular basis. It's just the key portion of, you know, having a financial institution. So you guys are probably uniquely educated on this conversation. So I'll stop talking so much on it, but we'd just like to hear your perspective. Like, what do you guys see as regulatory hurdles? Have you seen progression in the last 2 years? What do you kind of see the next few years? And, you know, are there some jurisdictions you think are more friendly or less?
Definitely, yeah. You see a difference in the interest of specific central banks, for example, when they started early experiments, like the Bank of Singapore, well, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, sorry, or the Bank of Canada, et cetera, right? So you have those that are always a little bit more, prominent, and they start researching deeper. And then you have the ones that are, as you mentioned, more conservative. I think one specific thing that in Europe might be hindering some of the innovation is that, obviously it's a pan-European effort. So, a central bank, and we're regulated by the European Central Bank, right? So as a central bank, let's say the Dutch Central Bank, which is the one that we are under because of our headquarters being in Holland, then they cannot only say, yes, we're going to allow you to do this and then go ahead, because they always have to also, convey and be in the lines with whatever the European Central Bank believes or wants to do. So in that sense, it takes like an extra layer of, education, convincing, working with, etc. But I think as well, whether you were talking about the advantages and disadvantages, right, of large institutions against, for example, the smallest startups, etc., or fintechs. And I must say that in my position, for example, I really appreciate the fact that I have a huge amount of, people that has been building up these relationships from the bank's perspective, right? And then I can always get the right name to the right person that I can be introduced, having as well a set of, specific colleagues that will know what they're talking about in terms of regulations. For example, you not only have to talk to the Dutch Central Bank or the ECB, you also have to talk to ICMA in case you're doing something. You have to talk to, ISMA, you have to talk to ESDA, you have to talk to so many parties, right? That as a single person, if I would be working in a startup and I wanted to do something, I would go nuts, because there are like so many regulations that you have to take in consideration. So then it's really nice to have that pool of experts that actually can support you and can be with you along this path. Meanwhile, you actually try to educate and bring along as well those regulators on the deployment of those cases, right? So for example, you were talking about one of the learnings, and one of the learnings has been as well that, since 2000 probably and 14 that we started looking into blockchain, we started conversations with the central bank, and we have been in constant conversations with them along the path, right? So it has been year after year, probably quarter after quarter, we bring them updates, we tell them, what are we doing, every single thing that we're doing, how are we doing it, and they are learning and they are coming with us along this specific journey, so they can properly also look at, for example, what kind of risks are we running, how are we mitigating them, and then we both are learning, right? It's always good to actually, brainstorm with such a regulator, because then they can bring a different perspective, and then they can help you as well take care of those specific concerns or risks. So yeah, for example, there was, I remember an initiative where a lot of different central banks were going to join to actually create a sandbox, right? And I think that's only good, because then you can indeed, the more, let's say, you can better see how can you actually foster innovation, how can you overcome those kind of concerns that everybody had. And I think it's just really interesting, but it also has to do with the technology, because the technology is a team technology, right? You have to do it all together. So it brings that spirit as well, even at the regulatory panel or perspective. So that's it.
Got it. Thank you for that. So my next question there, to kind of unpack that a little bit, I'm curious, kind of picking up on something you said. It sounds like you guys are, it sounds like, private industry is investing resources to understand blockchain or DLT technology. And that I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you guys are probably have a better understanding than like local governments or regional governments. And do you feel like you guys are kind of educating governments on this, or they're imposing on you what they want? How do you kind of see that?
I don't feel like we're educating them, at least on the Dutch perspective, for example. I must say that they were along, as I mentioned, through this journey with us. So a lot of the times, you know, they ask really, really relevant and really good questions that actually are quite refreshing. So for once, I don't think that we are, or that they are behind, you know, what we know. And probably that's, for quite some of the central banks. There are other central banks that are a little bit more...
Hey, I'm going to pause you right there for 1 second. But so it sounds like you think with blockchain, like maybe governments aren't always as fast to understand technology, which I just think is look at Facebook and GDPR, right? It's the same thing. I think when you get to the technology ends of regulation, it's a mismatch. You have usually older politicians that like by nature, like don't necessarily understand cutting edge technology as much as they should, but I don't hold that against them. So do you feel like this is a unique experience where they're picking it up faster? And if so, what do you think their motivation is?
I think they did pick it up on it faster than other technologies. Come on, they have even opened, right, forums, and they have funded, for example, a lot of research with regards to it. I think they were kind of reluctant in some of the cases with valid points as well. And for example, what you mentioned, right, like for the launch of Libra, right, and that white paper, how it kind of like fostered and actually made everything happen a little bit faster. But I find as well that we are a little bit sometimes impatient, you know. We try for them to actually have a regulation that will allow us to do X, Y, or Y when we don't even know what are we sometimes doing, right? So to be fair, sometimes I feel that a lot of the cases that have brought or have been brought to regulators might not be properly or 100%, you know, defined or super focused. And that's when you see them hesitant, right? And they're asking questions like, okay, but wait a second, you're saying this, but then how are you gonna do that? And then if you don't have the sharp answers, then you cannot expect for them to actually jump and say, okay, this is now the new law, and then go ahead and play with it, right? And I think we have seen from the past as well, from previous regulations, for example, like ANA credits, like GDPR, etc., that the better the focus, the better they regulate it. And if you leave it open, right, the more gaps you have and the less clear it is for everybody. And then it becomes a mess because everybody has a totally different understanding and interpretation of those regulations. And then it doesn't work, because then, it's defeating the purpose. So I think in this case, they're taking the right approach. They could be a little bit more, you know, like poked to be a little bit faster, but I think it's all on us as well, because we are currently, for example, who is not working on a taxonomy, right, of digital assets? Everybody is. I think there are like 20 different groups on a taxonomy, but they're not standard. So how do we pretend that they will actually regulate something that is just being created as well, right? So I think it has to go hand in hand, and we have to be as well patient and help them understand better what we're trying to do, for them to also help us understand what their concerns are, and then maybe together, you know, come to that specific middle point. But that's my view.
No. You have a very unique view. I'm learning a lot in this conversation. I know for a fact there's actually quite a few governments we're working with, either through universities and a few other projects that are going to either be attending or watching this. My last question on regulation, I'll just do a quick one, but for any person in a government watching this right now, what would be like a short, maybe 1 or 2 pieces of advice you'd say, how, based on your experience or how you've kind of seen that integration work, or that public-private partnership work, whether it's localized to the Netherlands, or other experiences you had? What would be like 1 or 2 points that you would just say, pay attention to this, or this is an experience that we had that if I could go back, or that we figured out later, that it was very valuable?
Openness. I think that transparency is something really nice, and just being open, for example, to listen, you know, what people actually want to deploy. So, for example, even though in the Dutch central bank we don't have a sandbox per se, you know, that doesn't mean that we don't keep on conversations with them, and then that we listen to actually, again, their concerns, and we both learn from that, you know, And I think that openness and that transparency, it's really, really important. You know, in the past, probably a lot of people would be like, oh my God, don't tell them you're going to do this because, you know, what if? Right? Or maybe that you're going to be frowned upon, or maybe you're gonna raise or awake sleeping dogs. But I think that fear with these years, you know, it has been already taken away because we have seen again a more intrinsic approach from the governments to actually try to understand. So then they can properly regulate. So I would say, you know, keep an open mind, just listen, whatever, you know, the people is trying to tell you or whatever they're trying to deploy. That doesn't mean that you should allow everything, but that means that, you know, maybe that opens up again a different line of thought, and maybe those concerns can indeed properly be addressed, or maybe you can find other ways to address them together. So openness and transparency.
For all you world leaders out there that are watching that, that's probably some good advice for how you should deploy blockchain. Okay, so I kind of want to pivot off of regulation a bit, and I want to talk a few points you made, and I think probably in you know, it's my guess, but probably in the fintech sector or financial sector, it's probably more important than other areas because there are so many parties. I think whether it's a pilot might seem simple or some application might seem simple, you have many people to take into consideration. You know, and again, we were talking earlier. We deal with a decent amount of, you know, large organizations where I see there's so many stakeholders, right? So it's like, even if the technology is there, even if we say, okay, we have this technology, we know it works, right? Deploying it is then a different story. If you have to take, not, you know, so not even the technology being built well could actually not, that might not be the cause of it working, right? The cause of it working might be political factors, individual private interests. So how do you, obviously you guys have been a part of consortiums. It sounds like you've started consortiums. How do you think that that's been effective in the last few years? Is that kind of a key strategy going forward? What are maybe some of the lessons you learned that didn't really work about consortiums? And not to, before, I'll get one last thing, you know, I've heard multiple times where, you know, one company will come late to a consortium and maybe their interests, they don't feel like aren't as being taken and accounted for as the previous members, right? So just curious to get your thoughts on how you guys plan to approach that.
I think you touch upon a lot of different stories, and I have good ones and really bad ones as well to share. But what we believe, and actually the first reason why we started to form this consortium was because of two elements. The first one, it was because, as I mentioned before, we are truly customer centric, right? So if we're doing this for our customers, it would be silly to do it ourselves and believe that we know it all. So what we were doing a lot of the times was including one of the, for example, the customers with one of the, you know, I don't know, trading companies with one of the agencies, for example, for customs with one. So we created what we call a minimum viable ecosystem. So we graph different roles that specific value chain will have, and then as such we created actually that specific consortia that will balance actually the interest and make sure, you know, that whatever we were experimenting upon was actually valuable for everybody, not only for one specific person. And that helps you a lot with the validation. Remember, I talked about validation in the beginning. And that's really important, right? Because then you have the customer there to validate indeed that you're going in the right way. You have, for example, already a certain kind of adoption because already one customer is using it, because the industry is using it, etc. So then if whether you like it or not, a consortium, I think in a lot of the cases is beneficial because you start building already, you know, again, that adoption, you balance interest, you have a proper governance, that you work together and you make sure, you know, that everything is a little bit more fair for everybody. So from that perspective, that's why we really believe in consortium in that sense. And the second is because this technology really use, as I mentioned, you know, a team. It is a network, right? It's a network effect that you're trying to create. And having obviously a group of people that is already using that network makes it easier for you to actually grow that network and to scale. So those were the two main reasons why. And yeah, lessons learned from it is, you know, again, grab someone that represents, it can be a big player and it can be a smaller player, but that represents actually properly that specific part of the value chain. That's one. And the second is you have to work with people that you admire, So you have to admire them and that share your values. If someone doesn't share your values, you cannot work with that person. And that has happened to us. For example, I remember we were working in one case and then someone was being sneaky. And then what happens? The whole group finds out and then nobody wants to work with that person anymore, right? Or so it's really important that you all admire each other, that you know that what you're going to bring is something valuable for the group. And again, that you share, what motivates you and that values together with you, because otherwise, it feels like someone else is doing nothing and you're, carrying everything, or maybe you're being annoying to the rest because they think that you believe that you're the leader, or I don't know, different type of scenarios that you may have. But I think those two are the most important learnings that we have had.
Got it. One more question quickly on consortiums. What would you say tend to be like maybe top 1-2 things that you have to balance between all parties' interests? Like what tend to be, and I'm sure it's specific to each sector, but I guess from what you guys see, what are the main points that people really want to secure individually as part of a consortium?
Well, in our case, it was in the beginning, we started looking at people that wanted to also, experiment with blockchain. That was obviously years ago. And we valued that because, it was such a nascent technology that you cannot know it all, right? At these times, you have an overflow of information, for example, and different ways of doing a lot of different things. So for us, it was a really good way and a quick way to learn, to bounce on ideas, to test some assumptions, and to actually also have, for example, some of the ideas that we would have, or the solutions that we would have, kind of like battle tested, or to use the wisdom of the crowds. So that was one of the main reasons why we actually started joining those consortia. We joined several. We joined, for example, we're founding members of Enterprise Dream Alliance. We also joined R3. We joined a humongous amount of different working groups with regards to regulation, distributed assets, crypto assets, etc. And some of them are really, really good, in terms of what you can learn, in terms of the peers, in terms of the people that is actually involved. And some of them are a little bit, somewhat less. But nevertheless, it's always good to also hear what everybody else is doing, because again, this is a team type of technology. So, and you can use it as well as, again, validation. So if you don't have that echo, and if you don't have that specific crowd, then you might be in a silo and working on something that is not even valuable. So I think from that perspective, we do appreciate working in consortium. And as well, you get a network, right, that you can create. So.
Got it. All right. So I know we're running a few minutes over, and I appreciate your time. And again, I really enjoyed this conversation. The last point I want to just jump on quickly is, and again, there's, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 university students watching this, some general blockchain enthusiasts, investors, top companies. I always tell people one of my favorite things about kind of what MouseBelt's done on the university level, we've been in the blockchain space for a bit where, we went through this like ICO phase and a bunch of different elements. I sit in certain rooms with people who have been in blockchain, let's say 5 years plus or a little bit less. And there's a little bit of pessimism, right? Like maybe there was some ICO scam that they got burned on, or some technology that they invested in then I get on a call with like 50, 19 to 22-year-old college students, right? That pessimism doesn't exist, right? Like they weren't part of this kind of like 5 years leading up to this. So they're like, data science majors, CS majors, whatever. They're like, we want to build application, or maybe people are part of it from the legal perspective, et cetera. They're like, we want to build something, and we kind of just want to build it in a decentralized fashion, right? So I kind of, sometimes I know where the next generation is coming from. I try to explain to people like, man, like there's a whole other perspective, like a generation aside. But for any students listening, they're kind of thinking about their next career path, or in technology, or maybe they're interested in, fintech applications or legal. What would be your advice to them? Like, if you were a student going through today, how would you think about blockchain, and what advice could you give them from ING that might, how you guys are thinking about that might impact, their evolution?
I think, well, blockchain is obviously not a panacea, right? So it won't solve every single use case I mentioned. So yeah, it's not that is a solution for everything, but it won't go away. That's 100% sure. You know, it won't go away. It has already marked the world, I think, and it's seriously disrupting a lot of the business models and a lot of the things that we're currently being or creating or are being created. So I think from that perspective, you know, we can even look at the history of blockchain because it has over 10 years, right? So in that sense, yeah, it won't go away. So I think it's a good investment, at least to understand the major principles, you know, how it works, why it works that way, where is it going, etc., the trends. But I would say, for example, looking at the future as well, is finding those synergies with other emerging technologies, right? Where are the limitations? Where can you actually plug different elements from different technologies to actually be able to add value to a specific proposition that you may have or may think of or may contribute with. So I think the ability of having a helicopter view and understanding, you know, how the advantages, disadvantages, and how the different technologies connect with each other might be a quite important competitive advantage in the future. Is that vision, you know, that you may have when you actually understand and master these different benefits of the different technologies, and when you plug them together, what I think will make the difference.
Got it. All right, last thing, because I know there's probably some people on here that are just like love Bitcoin and they're like, Patrick, like there's a bank with crypto, right? I think you're kind of unaware of some of these stigmas. What would you tell the community, right? That's saying like a bank is trying to get involved with blockchain or digital ledger technology. What would you tell the community? Like, do you feel like that everyone needs to be at odds there, that there's no way to work together, or, you know, from your personal perspective or ING's, like how do you view the community kind of coming together and are banks the bad guys in that situation?
No, I don't think we also have a right to play, right? And they are vouching for inclusivity, right? They want to be inclusive. So why would they actually kick us out? And we may not.
Amen. You can't say that you want to be open and then try to immediately exclude people.
Indeed, and for example, one of the really nice parts is even for the creator of Ethereum, like Vitalik, right? Has given us some pointers on how to best integrate, for example, a specific primitive in the EVM, right? So I would say, you know, you when you have something or when you're up to something good, you never care who is that person that is following you. Right, so everybody has the right to take advantage of whatever the world is actually developing or deploying, and make the best, take the best advantage then.
Love it. Well, hey, Mariana, I know we're cutting it here, and I have another interview coming up soon. I'm sure we could probably talk another hour, but it's been very nice to speak with you. And you know, for anybody listening, you know, the last question, and I really believe that, right? And I see it more and more every day. It's like, maybe you think the market is just Bitcoin. Maybe you're an anarchist. Maybe you're a libertarian. Maybe you're on the other side where you really want to bind all the regulators to really see blockchain adoption grow. You know, what the Ripples and Libras are doing. And, you know, at the end of the day, if we look at the core technology, it's not complicated, right? It should propose openness. It should propose transparency, ease of use, lower transaction times, etc. So, you know, it's up to all of us to kind of demand what we want to do in this space. And you know, clearly Mariana's passionate. Clearly she cares. You heard her talk about values for a while and how ING wants to approach partners, right? And I think that's an interesting way that we all need to kind of look at this space, right? So, Mariana, it's been very nice to talk with you. Any last words before we go?
Oh my God. No, I think, there's room for everybody. And I think we all can learn from each other. So just be open-minded.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for watching this clip. We have another interview coming up shortly, and we're here for 72 hours, and we really hope you guys are appreciating it. So thanks again, Mariana. We will talk to you guys soon, and thank you, everybody, for watching.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. REIMAGINE 2020.